for a few years now to legalize marijuana in the state of Rhode Island. Several years ago, the state legislature decriminalized it to a certain extent. Prior to that, they had allowed for medical marijuana. One of the issues that other states are wrestling with as they've legalized marijuana is the issue around adolescent substance abuse and the implications of legalizing marijuana and what the impact would be on mostly our teenagers, but even some of the preteens that are susceptible to substance abuse. The Attorney General's office is at the forefront of a campaign to point out the dangers of legalizing marijuana. I don't know what the legislature is going to do, although there seems to be more of a sentiment or a push to create a study commission and kind of roll it over. All due deference to the General Assembly. Frequently when they run into a very difficult issue that needs to be addressed, the ubiquitous study commission rears its head and we end up studying it for a year. It's a nice way of saying we're not going to make a decision. Given the next year's an election year, the study commission may not report back until sometime in 2019. But I want to introduce Joey Lenbeck, who was the Assistant Attorney General. Joey is also the main lobbyist for the Attorney General's office, so we work closely with her on this issue, on school safety issues, on guns in schools. So there are a lot of common points that we work together on in the Assembly, and the Attorney General's office really does work hand in hand with our association and the Superintendent's Association in the quest to protect children in the classroom and in the areas where they live. Joey is graduated from Michigan State University. She got a Juris Doctorate from New England School of Law. She started her tenure with the Attorney General's office in 2005. And as I said, she is the primary person at the State House advocating for the Attorney General's agenda and program, which frequently coincides with ours. Without any further ado, Joey.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm sorry that Attorney General Kilmartin isn't here. He had a scheduling conflict, but I promise I'll hopefully be just as delightful as he is. Along with being the legislative liaison for the office, I'm also a prosecutor in the Narcotics and Organized Crime Unit. My specialty is drug court and diversion on substance abuse issues, so I do have some knowledge about the topic that you're talking about today, and I hope to be somewhat of an insight. The Attorney General has tasked my unit to go around to cities and towns, businesses, superintendents associations, trade associations, to talk about what we have learned in the 12 years of medical marijuana and what we've learned from our western states regarding legalization of marijuana. That's why I'm here to talk to you about today. Some of these topics will be very sensitive to schools and school committees and the work you do. Others will not, and will kind of go through those quicker, but I wanted you to see a whole sense of what was going on in this debate, because a lot of people don't talk about the real issue. People talk about, well, I don't care if my neighbor has marijuana. I don't care if my neighbor has marijuana either. But that's not what this conversation's about. This is about how Rhode Island is going to create and regulate a brand new industry, which we know we're not that good at anyways. And the medical marijuana program, while getting better, has kind of been a relative disaster in some ways. This is half of our presentation. The first half is about medical marijuana, the issues we're seeing in our black market, our gray market, the amount of marijuana from the program that's on our streets, in our kids' hands, the electric dangers of the grows that are in our neighborhoods. But I'm not going to focus on that today. If you ever want me to come out and speak to your school committee on those issues, I'd be more than happy to. But I'm really happy to be in front of the school committees today. We have been in front of the superintendent, so it really is a pleasure to be in front of all you, and I thank you. So our question to everybody is, will legalizing marijuana benefit our community and our citizens? We think that's the basic question that everyone should be asking. And here's some questions we have of why are we really making this decision? Are we doing it to allow for medical relief? We have a vibrant medical marijuana program. So no, we've done that. Are we doing it to allow for possession of small amounts of marijuana, that social justice issue? We've done that too. Possessing an ounce or less of marijuana for an adult, it's a $150 fine. For children 16 and under, it's a substance abuse evaluation at the family court, no fine. That's legislation Attorney General Martin enacted in 2016 because we wanted to get at the substance abuse issue at the forefront so it didn't go into harder drugs. And you hear social justice. The war on drugs was an abysmal failure. We don't want to lock up people possessing marijuana. As of March 31st of this year, there are 4 people at the ACI on marijuana charges. 2 serving sentences, 2 pending trial. And when I talk about serving for marijuana, it's not marijuana possession. It's delivery, possession with intent to deliver, manufacturing. We have 4. So clearly we don't have the huge social justice issue that maybe we see in the federal system. We think this is a very complex policy decision that's going to have ripple effects from years to come that we don't know anything about. But as Tim said, the state hasn't studied this issue at all. We've never talked about it. There's a bill been put in by marijuana advocates nationally in the General Assembly that doesn't really get into the details that will affect Rhode Islanders, schools, businesses, hospitals, etc. So things we do know. We know that there is an impact on youth. Rhode Island is 5th in the country for marijuana use, 12 to 17, are high school kids. We're 4th in the country for college-aged, 18 to 5 marijuana use. Here's some numbers. You hear proponents of the Marijuana Act say use in Colorado's went down. The statistics are flat. But we do know this. They use the Healthy Kids Colorado survey as their point. But this study showed that there was a 7% increase in the years that marijuana was legalized. It shows that high school use around seniors went up 14%, and high school use for juniors raised 19%. It also showed some other troubling things, and this is a 2016 study. Marijuana-related incidents in schools increased 82% since legalization. 45% of those incidents were students being under the influence during school hours. In 2015 to 2016, marijuana violations were the majority of all drug violations, and 58% of expulsions, 73% of referrals to law enforcement, and 63% of suspensions were for marijuana violations in Colorado. Other things we know. 1 in 6 teenagers who use marijuana will become addicted. This is in comparison to 1 in 11 adults. And we know the impact. Teenagers who use marijuana before the age of 16 performed worse on cognitive tests of brain function. We know that use of marijuana by teenagers can change brain development, and that's linked to poor grades, higher dropout rates, and lower IQ scores. And frequent use is a permanent drop in IQ, and unfortunately, those lost cognitive abilities do not come back in those teenagers. This is one of the things that we like to talk about because we're trying to build a future economy. I always say, if we legalize marijuana, what does our workforce look like in 2030? We have empty 195 land. We're talking about meds and eds and building our workforce. What happens to our children if we make this decision, and how does that impact their future? And one of the issues is the modern marijuana, and I'm sure you're seeing it in your schools. In the 80s, where most of the medical research is done on impact, it was a 4% THC for that dried, usable marijuana that we all know and love. Right now, it's anywhere average from 15 to 25%, which is a greater impact on dependency and adverse and unpredictable results on the teenager. But the modern marijuana is exacerbating that program, and here's why. We have what's called a marijuana concentrate. And that's when you take the dry usable marijuana, put it in a pipe, and rip the THC off of the plant. You can do that through butane, butter, oil, carbon dioxide, dry ice, run the gamut. What results in is an 85 to 95% THC product. So when we think about studies on health impact being done at 4% THC and then we look to an 85 to 95% product, what is the result of that? And we do know that's what the kids are using these days because it's an easier way of use. So here's some edibles. Drinkables. And here's the concentrates, main form concentrates that are used. It can be done in a solid form or in a liquid form. The liquid form is what's used to make all those other products, but the liquid, the shatter, the butane hash oil that we've probably heard about, the solid is used in like a pipe. It's like kind of the crack of cocaine, for lack of a better word. But the oils, here's some more examples of that. The oils are used in those e-cigarette vape pens, probably being used in your schools now. And the reason they're being used is because they're odorless. You can't smell that it's marijuana. It could be a 0%. They could be like, oh no, I'm just using my vape pipe to get nicotine, but it's 0% nicotine. It might very well be marijuana concentrate. And this is how you put the solid on that white coil right there and sparks it up. Same effect, odorless. So these are the trends that we know are happening in Colorado. And I just got an email on my phone yesterday that a new study came out of Colorado that ER visits by teenagers in Colorado have quadrupled since marijuana legalization. And we're going to talk about that. But I want to show you, these are edibles from one of our local compassion centers. Drinkable, edibles, and here's other ones. Looks medical, the pills, the tincture, the oil to put behind your tongue. Who's that aimed at? Kids. So, like I said, because of the increased THC potency, we have seen an increase in ER visits and poison control calls in Colorado and Washington. In Colorado, in the first year of marijuana, ER visits went up by 4,000. They went up, ER hospitalizations for marijuana went up about 3,000 in the first year. At Children's Hospital Colorado, they had 1 marijuana ingestion. In 2009, there were 16 the second year of legalization. Poison consented calls is what's really troubling. In Colorado, in the 3 years prior to legalization, the 3 years after average, exposure calls increased 155%. Calls regarding use 6 to 7 increased 112% in that same 3-year average. And in Washington state, 67% increase of poison control calls since legalization. Callers under 20 increased 80%. This is just to talk about, you hear that we're going to take marijuana out of the dealer's hands, that it's going to be a purely legalized market, that law enforcement's going to work on other issues, but we do know a lot of things about that coming out of Colorado. Crime has not decreased in Denver. It has went up. Their B&Es and robberies have went up as well. Crime in Colorado has went up as well. And we still have a black market in Colorado. 44% of Denver sales are from out-of-state visitors, and 90% of their tourist industry, the mountains towns, are purchased from out-of-state purchasers. So it really brings the question is, where are Coloradians buying their marijuana if we've taken away the black market? It's estimated that only 60% of marijuana in Colorado is bought legally through the stores. We have had seizures by law enforcement of Colorado heading to different states, and we have also had seizures by the United States Postal Service of marijuana being shipped out of Colorado, because Colorado is really the prime marijuana that people want now. This is a slide from the city of Denver. We've worked very closely with them for the last couple years, trying to learn from them. And they show their black market coming out of their medical marijuana program. They call it a gray market, those who can legally purchase but illegally deliver. We see that same issue in Rhode Island, and we don't think that that will change. In fact, we're very nervous, and the Attorney General speaks about it a lot, is how do you put a retail market on a broken medical system? And people like to speak of those two things in silos, but when we talk about marijuana in the state, you really have to intertwine those two issues because of that very slide. and what we know from Denver. And here's why it still exists. It's the same reason that Rhode Island is usually at the top of the nation of illegal cigarette smuggling. It's the taxes. When you think about a commercial industry, you have overhead, taxes, brick and mortar, employees, insurance. A drug dealer doesn't have any of those things. So in Mexican cartel marijuana is about $300 a pound right now. Colorado, weed in Colorado is $2,000. If you bring it on the 95 corridor, Miami to Maine, it's about $5,500 a pound. There's so much money in this industry to keep it on the gray-black market. And you can go on Craigslist and research Rhode Island medical marijuana, and you'll see sprinklings of the illegal market. But what's unfortunate to me, and I've just learned, is that the budding marijuana black market is Instagram, which I never would have thought of, and it's hashtag Rhode Highlands is where you can see the black market. So now I have to get an Instagram account, which I'm not really happy about, but that's what's going to happen. This is a drug dealer saying that legalization has made the black market more. And Colorado Springs police saying the legalization has only enhanced the black market. We know the cartels aren't going to back down. They're not going to lose money because America is legally doing marijuana, but we have seen a decrease in marijuana from the cartels by 11%. More scary is that 3 times the amount of heroin has been seized by the cartel since 2009, and an increase in amphetamines too, because they're not going to lose their money. They're a criminal enterprise. Driving while drugged, which I know is one of the big concerns regarding marijuana legalization, we have some really interesting number. Marijuana-related traffic deaths in Colorado increased 48% in the 3-year average pre- and post-legalization. Of note, Colorado traffic fatalities only increased 11%. There's been a 67% increase in operators in fatal accidents who have tested positive for marijuana before legalization. The scariest point of this slide is Denver police saw 106% in driving while drugged cases the first year of legalization. In Washington, their operators who were involved in fatal accidents increased 122% from 2010 to 2014. In Spokane Valley Police in Washington, 64% of their DUIDs, marijuana related, involved youth. So, and one thing I want to talk to you about that is Rhode Island is only a blood draw state if there's death or serious bodily injury. So we're lucky that we have a per se DUID law that if there's a presence of drugs in your system, you don't have to hit a .08. If you have it, it's your DUID. But we won't be able to get that data unless someone consents to the blood draw, unless there's a death or a serious bodily injury. So there are some law enforcement complications on our end for DUID cases currently, and we're doing the best we have. We have 75 about drug recognition officers in the state, but it will be complicated. It already is. But here's what we think this conversation is about. Money, right? This is why we're doing it, money. So there's clearly going to be new revenue, right? Because it's a new revenue source. You guys all know that. A new tax, a new fee, new revenue. The question is, what is it going to be spent on and how much money is it going to take to enforce this? Not simply state regulation, the long-term effects, the societal costs, law enforcement, healthcare, etc. We haven't done a study on that. There is not a fiscal note. There's no one saying how many new SROs are you going to need in your school? How many more substance abuse counselors are we going to need? None of that. We don't know. Things we do know. Total marijuana tax revenue for Colorado was 0.5% of their general revenue in FY16. Colorado is also in hundreds of $1 million budget deficit right now. I will tell you out of pure honesty that they have a different tax structure than we have and a different structure. But they're in a budget deficit, and that's how much money they're collecting. Those are 2 known facts. This, and I like to point to this, so I'm going to leave the microphones for a second. This is the chart of how we distribute money in Colorado. It's very complicated. 2 things I want you to see, and I hope you can still hear me, I'm loud. You see that pink diamond in the middle? That's what the cities and towns get. It is 15% of a 10% tax pass-through. That's it. That's it. And a further note for your schools, no General Assembly has voted to do this. It's all been voted referendum where we've legalized, because no one cares if their neighbor has pot, right? So the campaign issue in Colorado was, we're going to use this money to make better schools. Everyone wants better schools, right? Those two diamonds on your left is the school money. It's a 15% excise tax on retail marijuana, all of which is going to go to schools. The first $40 million is going to build new schools. The second $40 million is new technology, upgrading books, new teachers, etc. They didn't even hit the first $40 million. So in increases in FTEs, I'll just show you some points here. When Colorado started, they had 15 FTEs, and what's their DBR, their MED? They've already increased it to 70, and I was out there last year speaking to their MED. They said that was hardly enough to deal with the applications, let alone inspecting the cultivators, the stores, etc. And you say that, you know, let's do something, law enforcement has more important things to deal with. Before legalization, Denver Police Crime Lab took in about 500 pounds of marijuana. The year after legalization, they took over 9,000 pounds of marijuana. The burden on law enforcement only increased in this market. Data collection, I know everyone likes to talk about big data now. That's the focus of all of us. We have no data. I couldn't tell you how many decriminalization tickets were at the traffic tribunal. I can barely tell you how many marijuana DUIDs we have. What I can tell you is that Colorado and Washington have spent a lot of money creating data collection. And of note, Washington has what's called an I-502 group. Their sole purpose is to look at initiatives that their General Assembly passes. I-502 is currently in a huge review of legalization in Washington. Their first major report is due to come out this year, which I think would give Rhode Island lots of information to study this issue of the fiscal impact that Washington's seen, things that we can learn from and things that we can avoid. And I would, once this report comes out, we're planning to distribute it to everyone in our pipeline so we can get a true look at actual numbers that we don't have. Litigation, these next couple of slides I really want to you guys to think about as, you know, leaders of your school districts, because there's been lots of litigation. Whether it's pesticide use in Denver, what public consumption means, marijuana bars and lounges, we've already seen those popping up around Rhode Island. Nuisance odor, is it a public nuisance under your town ordinance to smell the marijuana coming off the cultivation? Advertising, think about the billboards, think about the master settlement agreement in tobacco. Banking, because you can't put the money in federally chartered banks. And then employment, and this really hits home to you all. What happens to our workforce? Not our future workforce with the kids, but our current workforce, and what kind of decisions can you as employers make regarding marijuana use on the job? A company in Denver has started to go outside of the state to have people that can pass a pre-employment drug test. We know that's happening in Rhode Island as well, especially in our manufacturing and defense industry. On the marijuana use in the legalized states, Washington's at 23%, Colorado's at 20%, the national average is 5%. This slide points to the fact, this is a staffing agency, more than half of their applicants passed failed the pre-employment drug screen. So in Rhode Island, we cannot discriminate against someone from having a medical marijuana card solely. That does not mean you can't deal with the fact of using on or off the job. There is a company in Westerly that's currently in the middle of litigation in the Superior Court. They have already spent $50,000 in legal fees on that. And that was about off-the-job use. The Colorado Supreme Court in 2015 said that employers can refuse to hire or fire on off-the-job medical marijuana use. But the marijuana industry has claimed that that will be their next legislative fight. They have a strategy: decrim, medical marijuana, decrim, legalization, employee rights. That employee rights bill was filed in the Rhode Island General Assembly last session. And that's something we all need to look at. People like to say that marijuana is like alcohol. Okay. I don't see people creating tons of alcohol to put on the streets in their homes, but that's a different story. We can debate that. But in 2012, the alcohol industry took in $16 billion of revenue. We spent $249 billion in societal cost. I like that figure to compare it to. Prevention and treatment, which we all know is an issue. That's why we're here today. We don't have enough beds. We have insurance problems. What DC is doing is complicating that wholeheartedly. In the first 9 months of 2015 in Washington, marijuana treatment accounted for 70% of youth treatment admissions, and that's in an opiate crisis. In Colorado and Denver at the Apraho House, their increase was 66% since 2010. So what would our neighborhoods look like? Colorado has 424 retail stores, 516 medical stores. They have 942 pharmacies. So they just have a little bit more pharmacies than they do have marijuana stores. So this is the question that we ask everybody that we go talk to, and it's the same question I'll leave you here with today. If it's inevitable that we're legalizing marijuana, Mass has done it, Vermont's on their way, the other jurisdictions has, what can you do about it? As a person, as an individual, in your capacity in a school committee, what can you do about it? The biggest thing that we like to tell people is, you need to have your voices heard in this conversation. We don't care what position you have on it, but we all know there's issues impacting your school committee. Let your voice be heard on your issue, because it's not right now. The bill that's at the General Assembly doesn't detail any of the issues that we talked about. Doesn't deal with employer issues, doesn't deal with FTEs. Make your voice heard on your issue, or it's going to be too late. And that's the reason we are supporting the study commission, because we think there's a lot of decisions that need to be made if we're going to do this in the right way. And we need everyone at the table to make that bill, if it is inevitable, as best as it can be. We also think that municipalities should be able to say, no, not in our town. And we've been giving them zoning ordinances to deal with both medical and retail with the same thing. We don't care what you do. You just need to do something to protect your town. Make the decision, be proactive, don't be reactive, make the decision. But I'll leave you with this. 75% of Colorado municipalities either opted out of retail stores or placed a moratorium. In flip, 68% of cities and towns in Colorado said no to retail stores. They still have about 935 stores in about a third of their communities. They're infiltrating certain communities. They're targeting minority communities. We all need to be on the lookout of where we want these stores to be, what we're going to do, and be an active participant. We ask that the associations that we go to think about passing resolutions opposing retail marijuana. We've had at least 7 cities and towns do that. I know the Superintendent's Association is working on that right now. So I would really encourage you to go back to your school committees, go back to your towns, and have an active conversation about this issue, because it's already affecting our communities with medical, and it's going to further impact us with retail. So thank you.